The night everything changed, Margaret Ashford wasn't thinking about her husband sleeping 3 doors down. She was thinking about the suffocating heat of South Carolina and the man waiting in the shed behind the stables. His name was Joshua. He was 28 years old, and he was her husband's property. Each step toward the stables was careful as a thief's under moonlight. Summer 1851 at Ashford Plantation. Margaret's heart pounded like a war drum. Not from the heat, but from fear, desire, the desperation of a 23-year-old woman who'd been married 4 years and was still a virgin. 4 years of marriage, 4 years of whispered promises, failed attempts ending in tears, his, never hers, and endless nights staring at the canopy, wondering if this was what the rest of her life would be. Nathaniel Ashford, 20 years older, respected, educated in England, owner of 200 acres. Her father had arranged the marriage. She believed her future was secure. What no one tells you, some men simply can't. Nathaniel's body refused. Doctors came secretly. Potions, herbs, nothing worked. With each failure, he sank deeper into shame and alcohol. Margaret should have hated him, but he was kind, intelligent, generous. He built her a greenhouse, never raised his voice, a good man trapped in a betraying body, a good wife trapped in a marriage that was killing her. Until Joshua. Joshua arrived 3 months ago, purchased in Charleston, $1,200 because he could read, write. Trained blacksmith and carpenter, tall, nearly 6'4", shoulders capable of carrying the world, massive hands but delicate precision. She noticed him, first just glances. Margaret with her parasol, pretending to inspect fields, but searching for the workshop where Joshua worked shirtless, sweat on dark skin, muscles flexing. Something woke in her. He noticed her too. Eyes meeting one afternoon. The world held its breath. Mutual recognition. 6 weeks of encounters. Margaret requested repairs. Joshua came, worked. When alone, they talked. Small things first, then intimacies. He spoke of his mother, sold when he was 10. She spoke of her loneliness. The first kiss was accumulation of weeks, unspoken words, lingering looks, brushing hands. It happened in the library. "No, ma'am, this can't." Voice rough with fear. Margaret closed the distance, hand on his chest, heart pounding, kiss clumsy, hungry, hands at her waist, strength that made her feel alive. They pulled apart breathless. Joshua's eyes wide with terror. He knew what happened to enslaved men who touched white women. Lynching, torture, death. Margaret swore she wanted it, would never tell. Both knew how little promises meant. They couldn't stay away. More daring encounters. Greenhouse, shed, attic. Enormous risk, but hunger was stronger. Joshua touched her like something precious. Asked what she wanted, how she felt. Nathaniel never asked like that. Afterward they talked. Joshua recited Shakespeare, Milton. Margaret marveled at the cruel injustice that called a man like this property. She fell in love. Not romantic love, but something darker, complicated. Love mixed with guilt, shame. She loved him, and her love put him in mortal danger. She loved him, and she owned him. Joshua loved her, but she saw doubt in his eyes. How can an enslaved person trust their owner's love? Tonight, crossing toward the stables, she wasn't thinking about complexities. She was thinking about his hands, his mouth, about forgetting she was Margaret Ashford and just being. She pushed the door open, moonlight filtering through. Joshua waiting. He smelled of forged coal. "You shouldn't come. It's dangerous." "I know. I don't care." But she should have cared. In the main house, Nathaniel was awake. He'd seen his wife from the window where he drank brandy. For the first time, he decided to follow her. What happened next would change everything. But it wouldn't come from the violence Joshua feared or the scandal Margaret imagined. It would come from something stranger, more twisted. A proposal from a broken man who'd reached a desperate conclusion about the only way to save his marriage, his reputation, what little remained of his dignity. Nathaniel stood outside the shed, listening to sounds from within. Whispers, gasps, the unmistakable rhythm of 2 bodies joining. He should have felt fury. Should have kicked down the door, dragged Joshua out, summoned the overseer for brutal punishment. That's what any other white man in the county would have done. But Nathaniel Ashford didn't feel fury. He felt something more complicated. relief mixed with shame, curiosity with desperation. As he listened to his wife finding pleasure with another man, an idea began forming. Scandalous, pragmatic. It could actually work. He didn't kick the door, wouldn't summon the overseer. He turned around, walked back, his mind spinning with possibilities. If he couldn't give Margaret what she needed, if his body refused to cooperate, then perhaps there was another way. Keep his marriage intact, give her satisfaction, finally produce the necessary heir. It only required swallowing his pride, accepting his failure, making an arrangement that would make him a cuckold. But if no one else knew, if it stayed secret, then it could work. Turn his greatest shame into a strange, twisted solution to all his problems. The next morning, Nathaniel summoned Margaret to his study. She arrived, pale, dark circles under her eyes, expecting her world to end. Instead, Nathaniel poured her tea, asked her to sit, and calmly said he knew about Joshua. Margaret started crying, swearing she'd ended, begging him not to punish Joshua, offering to leave the plantation. Nathaniel let her talk until she ran out of words, then said something that left her speechless. "I'm not going to punish him, and I'm not going to ask you to stop." Absolute silence in the study. Margaret stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "I don't understand," she whispered. Nathaniel took a long drink of tea. "I've failed as your husband. I can't give you what you need, what you deserve, but he can. Joshua can. So I'm proposing an arrangement, simple on paper, monstrous in practice. Margaret would continue her relationship with Joshua, but with Nathaniel's blessing under certain conditions. First, absolute discretion. No one else could know. Second, if Margaret became pregnant, and they both expected she would, the child would be presented as Nathaniel's. Third, Nathaniel would have freedom to seek his own satisfaction wherever he could, without judgment from Margaret. That last condition made Margaret physically sick. She knew what it meant. Nathaniel would visit the slave quarters, select young women with no choice, use them to validate his masculinity. The women would suffer because he couldn't perform with her. But what choice did she have? If she refused the proposal, he could sell Joshua, punish her, ruin everything. At least this way she and Joshua could be together, however twisted. At least it wouldn't end with Joshua's body swinging from a tree. She agreed. Nathaniel summoned Joshua and explained. Joshua was terrified at first, convinced it was a trap. But gradually he realized Nathaniel was serious. The master was offering a deal: continue with Margaret, keep her happy, and in return Joshua would receive better treatment, easier work, the promise he'd never be sold. Joshua agreed because what else could he do? He was enslaved. He had no real choices. If the master said sleeping with his wife was his duty, then that was his duty, no matter how twisted. So began the strangest arrangement in Ashford's history. During the day, everything seemed normal. Nathaniel, the respected owner, Margaret, the gracious mistress, Joshua, the skilled foreman. But at night, the rules changed. Margaret slipped to the shed or greenhouse where she and Joshua could be alone. Meanwhile, Nathaniel began visiting the slave quarters. He selected 3 young women: Lily, 18, honey-colored skin; Sarah, 22, mother of 2; Ruth, 19, new to the plantation. None had a choice. When the master called, you came. Brutal reality of slavery. Nathaniel told himself he was gentle, gave them gifts and easier work, told himself this made it different. But he knew the truth. There was no such thing as consent when one person owned another. These women submitted because refusal could mean being sold away from their children, being whipped, or worse. The arrangement continued 9 months without major incident. Tense moments when servants seemed suspicious or guests asked uncomfortable questions, but nothing that threatened to expose the truth. Margaret grew more confident, relaxed. She smiled more. Guests commented how well marriage suited her. If only they knew the real reason. Then Margaret realized she was pregnant. First pure joy, then immediate terror. The child was obviously Joshua's, but how would she explain a pregnancy to the world? Nathaniel would have to claim the child as his. But what if it was born with features that made paternity obvious? Dark skin or unexplainable hair texture? Margaret confided in Nathaniel, expecting anger. Instead, he surprised her again, said they'd claim the child no matter how it looked. If necessary, they'd say Margaret had been assaulted by an enslaved man who'd been caught and killed. Horrible lie that would require murdering an innocent man to maintain the deception. But Nathaniel was willing. He'd come too far to let it fall apart now. Margaret felt sick but couldn't offer an alternative. Joshua, informed of the pregnancy, experienced a complex mix: joy at a child, terror at the danger, deep sadness that he could never acknowledge this child. His son would grow up enslaved or white depending on appearance, but Joshua could never be a true father. The pregnancy progressed. Margaret's belly grew. Society ladies visited, congratulated, Nathaniel accepted. Cigars and backslaps. Everyone marveled at the happy couple finally starting a family. Only 3 people knew the truth, bound by secrets that could destroy them all. The baby was born on a humid August night. Margaret labored 14 hours, screaming in the bedroom while Nathaniel paced downstairs and Joshua worked in the fields, unable to be near the house without raising suspicion. When the midwife emerged with news of a healthy boy, Nathaniel ran upstairs, heart pounding with fear. The baby, wrapped in white linen, had skin that could pass for white. Slightly darker than Margaret's porcelain complexion, but within normal range, hair curly but not kinky, features ambiguous. Nathaniel felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly knocked him over. They could do this. He held the baby, his wife's child by another man, and made a decision. He would love this boy as his own. Give him everything: education, wealth, position. The child would never know the truth. They named him Thomas, after Nathaniel's father. The christening was a grand affair with half the county attending. Margaret held her son and smiled at congratulations, knowing the true father was somewhere on the plantation, unable even to look at his own child. Joshua saw Thomas only once, from a distance. Even from afar, Joshua could see himself in the child's features, the shape of the nose, the set of the eyes, his son, his boy, who would grow up calling another man father, who would inherit wealth built on the backs of enslaved people like Joshua himself. The injustice burned like acid in Joshua's chest. But what could he do? Nothing. He could do nothing but watch from afar and hope the boy had a good life. But secrets, like seeds, have a way of growing in darkness until they burst into light, destroying everything in their path. The break came 2 years later. Thomas was growing bright and active. Margaret and Joshua still met occasionally, but the passion had cooled. The arrangement was rotting from within. The enslaved people of Ashford hadn't forgotten what they knew about their master's secrets. The knowledge simmered beneath the surface, breeding resentment. The break came when a new brutal overseer, Jessup, falsely accused Joshua of theft. He tied him to the whipping post, raised the whip. Margaret came running, ordered him to stop. Jessup sneered, raised the whip again. Margaret stepped between them, using her body as a shield. The plantation went silent, everyone understood. A white woman didn't risk herself for an enslaved man unless there was something between them. Jessup lowered the whip, eyes narrowing. He backed down. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen. Richard fired Jessup and paid him for silence. Too late. The secret was out through Margaret's own actions. Neighboring planters began to talk. Whispers circulated. The Caldwells were strange. Margaret was gradually excluded from society. Richard's business suffered. They were being ostracized. Richard knew something had to change before whispers became open accusations. He summoned Margaret and Joshua to his study, told them it was over. Joshua would be freed, but had to leave Louisiana and never return. Margaret broke down, begging. Richard was adamant it was the only way to protect Thomas. If Joshua stayed, the truth about paternity would destroy the boy. Joshua listened in silence, nodded, and left. That night, Joshua didn't go to the shed. He went to the slave quarters and gathered those he trusted. He'd been planning escape for months, contacting the Underground Railroad. Now he'd act. Over the next week, 15 people disappeared into the night, guided by Joshua toward freedom. The largest escape in the parish's history. Slave catchers hired, rewards posted, but they were never found. Richard was furious at the betrayal. Margaret understood. Joshua had taken revenge the only way available. By freeing others, she never saw Joshua again. She heard rumors that he'd reached Canada, become a conductor on the railroad, helped hundreds reach freedom. She hoped they were true. Life at Ashford continued but was never the same. Richard's reputation never recovered. Margaret raised Thomas, pouring all her love into the boy. She never took another lover. The affair with Joshua had been the great passion of her life. Thomas grew up never knowing the truth of his paternity. He inherited Ashford, ran it 20 years, sold it after the Civil War, moved north, became a successful businessman, died in 1903, an old man surrounded by family, never knowing his father had been Joshua, an enslaved man who'd risked everything for love and freedom. The shed where they met was torn down years ago. Nothing remains but old records and fading memories. But the story endures, a reminder of the complicated, painful nature of human desire and the brutal system that shaped it. A story with no heroes, just people seeking happiness and dignity in a world designed to deny them both. Margaret died in 1889, an old woman who'd outlived her husband by 15 years. Her last words, whispered to a nurse who didn't understand the significance, were simply, "Tell Joshua I never forgot." Whether that message ever reached him, no one knows. But somewhere in the vast sweep of history, perhaps two souls who'd loved each other across an unbridgeable divide found peace at last.